One, go.
Good evening. Welcome to the November 5th school committee meeting. We will begin. I'll call the meeting to order. Tom?
Here.
Carla?
Here.
Aaron?
Here.
Sean?
Here.
Chuck is here. John will be joining us momentarily, we hope. We'll begin this evening's meeting with an executive session. Can I have a motion?
Yes. Move to go into executive session to discuss strategies with respect to collective bargaining and non-represented personnel and the approval of minutes with the intention to return to public session at 7 p.m.
Is there a second?
Second.
Carla?
Aye.
Aaron?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
Chuck? Aye. Okay.
See you on the other side.
Jeff, did Dale Gienap come in?
Yes, he's here.
Oh, there he is. Hi, Dale.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the school committee back to open session. Carla,
Here.
Aaron, John, Sean,
Here.
Tom,
Here.
John, Aaron, okay, so thank you, everybody. For the purposes of the agenda for the rest of the meeting, we'll start with a presentation by GNAP. It's actually an update on the elementary space study, and following that, we'll take out of order the new business and have the high school volunteer program, and then we'll do the district goals presentation, a fall opening update, and then we'll finalize the 2 policy readings for JLCB and AC. I'll hold reports in the consent agenda until the end. We also have a link for public comment, which if stuff that we're discussing, we'll address it at that time. If it's something that's not on the agenda, we'll address at the end. So, John, if you wanted to, hi, Dale. You're on
Chuck,
mute.
Yes, good evening.
Chuck, if I can just add one thing. The Permanent
Sure.
Building Committee, because of the technology glitches we had tonight with Outlook, they're watching it, but they aren't here. But they are in contact with Joe Huggins, who is here, in case they have any questions. So Joe Huggins may be asking questions on behalf of the Permanent Building Committee.
And we invited the FinCom and the Board of Selectmen.
There are members from the FinCom and Select Board here, I believe, yes.
Okay, does the Select Board need to be called to order? I can't see who's here.
Chuck, I only see Sean Jacobs.
Okay, that's the FinCom.
Yep, I don't see anybody from Select Board.
Okay. All right, well,
Yes, so essentially, and then I'll turn it over to Dale Gienap. What this essentially is a refresher. It was pretty much a year ago that we presented the elementary space and enrollment study to the committee. Certainly a lot has changed in the last year for a variety of reasons. So we felt it would be important to give the committee a refresher of the presentation from a year ago and with some updated information. So I'm going to turn it over to Dale Gienap, and he'll take it from here.
Okay, good evening. I'll try to share my screen here. Is that set up that I can do that? Yes, looks like it is. And so hopefully you're seeing a cover slide sort of for the beginning. Is that in view for everyone?
Yes, we're good.
Okay. So what I would like to do is just walk you through an overview of what we did for the elementary school study. The report has been written and is ready for a draft distribution at least. Essentially, that's the quick steps that we'll go through. But really in determining any long-term planning study, the key thing to do is first basically look at what you have, look at what you need, and figure out a path to get there. So in your case, we did look at the existing buildings, really more about their capacities than their conditions, although we, and I'm sure you are very familiar with the condition of the schools, looked at the current enrollment and what the enrollment projections are, and we'll walk through that, and how that translates to space needs, which is really driven by two factors: the enrollment existing and growing, and the educational program changes that have happened since the schools have been renovated and are anticipated in the future. Then develop a range of planning options for evaluation. And we really look at trying to develop a planning solution for the next 20 years. You want to be thinking much longer than that, 50 and beyond, but in terms of actually constructing facilities, you would not do things that do not have a need for 20 years or beyond. You would wait until you get closer and until you need them. And although the pre-K program was not officially part of this elementary school study, obviously it does have a significant impact. It occupies space in the schools, at least presently. And so that was considered as we looked at the various options. We contracted with New England School Development Council, that most of you are probably familiar with, to prepare the enrollment projections. They do that for many Massachusetts schools and beyond, as well as the region in general. Essentially, you have a modest enrollment growth of about 115 students over the next 10 years, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. We will just in a minute talk a little bit about the impact of COVID and what that's done to have a small decrease in enrollment at present. The growth, as you'll see in the next chart, essentially the majority of the growth is in the middle district. Let me turn the laser on. Is at Birch Meadow and the Killam areas, slightly less growth, well, quite a bit less growth happening at Barrows and Eaton, and then very negligible growth occurring at Wood End, and I'll show you these tables. So as just mentioned, at the Killam district, over the next 10 years, it shows an enrollment growth of 60 students at Birch Meadow, 33, only 3 at Wood End, so kind of statistically insignificant, and around 10 students at each the Barrows and the Joshua Eaton School, for around 115 student increase. The COVID impact right now, this is the various grades. Last academic school year, you had an enrollment compared to this year for grades 1 through 5. It's down around 48 students, or around 3%. And at the kindergarten, it's down significant number, 83, about 25% across the district. That average is 7. We have gone through this with NESDEC. They've been obviously very active with that across Massachusetts and beyond, and this is pretty common with what we see in comparable communities. At this point in time, as you know, it is very new. No one knows quite where we're going. The consensus seems to be in the planning community, and I think I can say with MSBA as well, is that it's a short-term anomaly, and it's anticipated in the near future the trend lines that have been occurring will continue. So essentially, at this point, it seems to be something to be ignored, but in the back of the mind, but people are continuing on with school projects and planning as if COVID had not occurred. As well, besides the enrollment, the other thing that has happened over the history of the schools is changes in the school program. And your schools are comparable to other communities for their ages, so I don't want you to take what I'm going to say here as shocking. The MSBA standards, or regulations, if you will, for elementary schools has a total of 160 gross square feet per student. So that's the overall building. It's further divided by core educational space and core spaces. Your schools are significantly under that as an overall average, and I'll show you more statistics in a second. And then all of the recent schools, by that I mean basically the elementary schools over the last 5 years that have been submitted to MSBA, average more or less around 190 square feet per student. And I'll be a little careful with throwing the numbers around. Most of them tend to be 190. If you did a statistical average, it might be slightly different, but that's what we see in MSBACs for most of what the communities are seeking. The town of Reading, your schools, again, sort of follow the history, run from a low of 127 at Birch Meadow up to 140, and your average across the district is 137 square feet. And again, that's compared to a minimum requirement of 160 and sort of the trend of 190. Wood End is highlighted here because Wood End does in fact have the 190 square feet, and it makes sense because of the most recently constructed school. And if you take Wood End out of it, the rest of them average 146. Now, I don't want anyone to see that and think that, this implies that you are going to rush out to all of the schools and try to get them under 190 square feet. That's not really what happens. Just as your schools have grown over time, when you did Wood End, you didn't go back and revise all the others. And so that's not what we would typically see in a community upgrading a school. But what it does tell you is that if one of the schools evaporated or you went to another site, that a new school would be significantly larger than the current ones that you have for the same population. Additional component that has factored into the program change is this. I don't expect you to get through all of these numbers. I'll direct you to. In 2005, full day kindergarten in your system occupied 5 classrooms, is now 14, so an additional 9 classrooms, and special education in 2005 was essentially 1 dedicated space, and now 18 for 17 additional. Pre-K I won't factor in at the moment. The point is this is sort of 26 classrooms. Not all of those are full-size classrooms, but in the time since the schools were built, 26 additional classrooms taken up by programs that really didn't exist at that time. And for a point of reference, your elementary schools have pretty much 18 to 20 general purpose classrooms. So we're talking about, adding the equivalent of a different school for those program needs. To summarize that, and then pre-K, enrollment projections are a little more difficult on that, and that is not a mandated program for you. You have some control, it's volunteer. So exactly how to estimate that could be debated a little bit. NESDEC did track births and so on, but essentially you have 110 pre-K students in the system now, and as you know, most of it is at the high school, which long-term I think could be considered not ideal. And in terms of growth, it's anticipated there would be at least a need to bring the program up to 175 students and possibly much larger. And I think this is a case where the current COVID situation could change that. So in terms of comparing it to the other grades, the pre-K is in fact the most extreme of those areas. So your enrollment, went the wrong way. Your overall enrollment, to kind of summarize the enrollment issues and space needs, if you will, your enrollment is a gross of around 6%. So if you just think about working with the existing schools and additional space, around 6% of the need is just based on enrollment. Programming, it's that gap again between what schools used to be, 125 to 130 square feet per student, to really now what the standard tends to be of around 190, is about 29% increase in those spaces. So if you just take an average across the whole district, you have, your schools are about 35% undersized, if you will. Now, again, that doesn't mean every school would try to be brought up to that standard, especially in one project. But one thing that it does tell you is obviously the least expensive is, could you just redistrict to solve space problems? And the answer is no, because everywhere is undersized. Would end sort of meeting the standard, but if you just added students to that, it would sort of decrease from the standard that you have now. So that's the overall sort of space need assessment that From there, we looked at planning options. This diagram is just to give you a relative sense. They're all at the same scale of each of the buildings and their site. And as you probably already knew, they are fairly similar in size, both the buildings and the sites, all of which are actually also undersized if you had open land and could take a new parcel and build a new school. We started with those sites to look at planning options and tried to look at what the various constraints, and that's not exactly the right word, but what are sort of the givens going into the problem. And one thing was keeping an awareness of the middle school districting. This is not an absolute requirement, but the concept being that if a group of children are in an elementary school together, when they advance and go to middle school, that they would all go to the same middle school. So ideally, you'd have the lines of districts aligned between the middle schools and the elementary in some way. I mentioned the cycle of building renovation and needs. That's really something that just to think about in terms of the outcome, but it was not a driving force. In other words, we didn't look at building conditions and say, what building physically needs the most work. This is more of a higher level sort of educational need driven approach. Limitations in current districts, again, just some natural boundaries, access, things like that. Then other constraints, sort of saying not practical at Josh Eaton and Alice Barrow School to do significant intensive additional use. And again, anything can happen, but just in terms of looking at the sites that would be the best candidates. Josh Eaton, we've talked about this before, between the historic front, there are 3 generations of school, I think 4 actually here. These pinch points for access make it difficult to do any significant expansion here, simply because there's not enough sort of contact points around the building and approaches from the outside that you would like to see available for a large school. All of your sites have somewhat of that problem. The same at Barrows and its limitations. All of your schools, as is typical, are in a neighborhood. The street access and residences are close by to this school. The steep slope, wetland boundaries, so you are limited essentially in what would be at least easy or low-hanging fruit to do an expansion or of this due to site constraints. And secondly, because of access, neighborhood congestion, etc., it's not the ideal candidate for a significant expansion. Wood End, it has a little bit more land. This drawing is probably a little bit deceptive because there is a very steep drop off here in wetlands and preservation, so you're really limited to an area here. It has some opportunity. The configuration of the building with core facilities, sort of lobby, and then all the classrooms here. You could certainly add to this school. It's not necessarily an easy one to just punch a few classrooms on and tie on to the existing systems. And one of its critical issues is the access to the site. Access to the north is blocked off at present, but that's very local. But beyond there, to get from there out to major arteries, there are neighborhood street constrictions along the way that would need to be looked at. And again, I mentioned that it is the only school that sort of is at a space per student that's consistent with current standards. So it would not be ideal to do something there that would sort of reduce that, if you will. And again, just what I mentioned before, over the whole district, you do not really have enough space, so it's not simply a matter of doing redistricting. Additional things that we looked at is the pre-K being at the high school. It's working there fine. You have sort of a unique setting on the back that gives you some access and more or less privacy, but it doesn't really have growth place to expand that greatly there. And presumably the activity at the high school site and pre-K are not the most ideal things to be blended. So It would be ideal if the elementary school solution could address that. Modular classrooms are not really considered a long-term solution. For instance, they are not reimbursable by the MSBA, and just essential planning, they're seen as a stopgap measure that are a very valuable tool to use, but not something to build your long-term program around. We assume going into this that some redistricting at least can be considered. We also anticipated, and it was reiterated by people, that there would be interest in reducing to 4 elementary school sites. Would that save cost and, you know, have other benefits, provide a parcel for other town uses, etc. And I think it's just, I can say, because of the size of the sites, that proved out to not really be viable. We could talk about it in more detail if you want. And I'm going to show you a couple diagrams, but these are not designs. These are just quick, you know, massing to give you an overall idea. And cost at this point obviously are just based on square foot. They are consistent with what we see current MSBA submissions. So there's, you know, there are many schools being in the MSBA process now, including elementary school. And so we've used dollars that are consistent with what current submissions are. And I think you'll find when you look at the report, we have updated that since last year because there have been cost increases in a number of different disciplines. So two options out of many that we sort of bring to you as that seem advantageous. Both feature working with the Killam site, which we'll talk about in a minute. So one solution would be to build a quite large, by your standards, like perhaps up to 725 student school on the Killam site. That size is determined by factors of some redistricting, and you know, this gives you some idea of moving. And you know, for instance, here it says 23 students going to Killam. Well, they might not be going to Killam, but they might move to another district than the redistrict lines. But essentially, the growth in the other schools and perhaps a few more students than just the growth would get absorbed by the project largely at the Killam site. This scheme essentially, you know, has an estimated construction cost of around $66 million and around 78 million total project cost. And I think you're familiar with what that is. This does not address the pre-K as fitting on one of these 5 sites. It would leave it at current, as it is currently at the high school. A variation on this would be, in order to try to accommodate the pre-K, would be to do a slightly smaller school at the Killam site, but new construction, and build an addition on the Birch Meadows School that would accommodate, both would accommodate a combination of pre-K, and the exact distribution of grades could be figured out, but it would be a relatively small addition there to help minimize the pressure and enrollment at the Killam site, and that growth, and at the same time accommodate the pre-K. Both of these options we sort of indicate here as a 2-story Killam site, but you know, this is a very first pass, and as you go forward with this or any scheme and enter presumably the MSBA system, there will be a lot more detailed analysis and scrutiny to refine these things. It's quite possible, especially in the single site scenario, that a portion of that school may need to be 3-story, which we also see happening with many elementary schools because many communities have the similar pressure that you do. You'll notice that the cost here, the overall cost is higher because you're working at 2 sites. Also, you're picking up pre-K, so roughly $20 million more total project cost. As we've talked about before, MSBA will only basically take one project or one, and that basically translates to one site into the MSBA system with a community at a time. So even though you might undertake it at one time, they would consider it 2 projects. And we can talk more about the reasons why I say this, but essentially I think you have to assume that that second project would be at your own cost, not likely to get MSBA reimbursement, partly because the time frame you would probably need it before you would be eligible to enter a second project, and it would probably not fare well in the competition by other communities that have a much greater need than you would have by the time you got to that second project. We did look at a large array of other options, and I'll just kind of, comment briefly on them. We looked at trying to essentially, instead of work with Birch Meadow, reduce some pressure and put students in addition, for instance, at Wood End. Because the location, the growth is at the south part of town, Wood End being at the north, it does not seem to work well in terms of location. It would require significant redistricting, which could be acceptable, but would also mean a lot more travel distance for people to get to the Wood End site. Also, the access is a bit of an issue continuing for that. We looked at whether we could do enough construction at other sites, say if it was even Birch Meadow plus Wood End, to simply renovate the Killam building. And essentially you need more space than we think you could accomplish that way. Doing any new project, new school that of enough enrollment at the Killam site is going to put pressure on that site and is going to need a lot of efficiency. And I don't think it could be accomplished by doing it just with a renovation. All of these are diagrammed. I'm happy to talk about them. They are diagrammed in the study and provided with numbers and so on, and we can come back to this at any level that you would like. We did look at, as a starting point, just what happens if you put an addition at all 5 elementary schools and sort of try to let each one of them take care of themselves, and you really don't have enough space at those places. That's also not an approach in a way that gets you where you want to be programmatically, because while the schools, and this is why you can't solve, the square foot per student with any one project, is that square footage is distributed all over. It's in every classroom, it's in the music room, it's in the gym. So it's not a matter of just going to a school and putting an addition on that has, say, 3 classrooms and accomplishing the goal for that site. So it takes more of a significant renovation. But the changes that you would do by building a new or larger school and taking the growth and some redistricting, it would allow you to regain some of the space per student that you've given up by subdividing classrooms and taking over larger music rooms. So some of that could be restored and help you get back to the educational space per student that you would like. Renting, that was considered, and we also considered whether it would be possible to just go to a 6th site, for instance, for pre-K and K. But the town has been through that before a couple times, and there does not seem to be an available site. Like I said, I would just comment because it seems like a lot of focus on the Killam site. Partly it's siting and its access, it's flat, it's good usable area, it does not have wetlands. It has even access from potentially a major street from the back. It has a good, it's a good buildable site that seems to be a candidate. It has the largest growth of enrollment in that neighborhood, that part of town. It is the only school on that part of town. So that sort of goes to an argument of not, say, making this a smaller school and moving large populations to the other side of town. So it has that going for it. And then it's centrally located, as is Birch Meadow, in terms of thinking about the districting for the middle school. And it really is a coincidence that this is the school that's the least modernized. We didn't start about this saying, well, let's try to accomplish that, because again, this is a longer term educational program consideration. but it does in fact turn out that way. And so some of the money that would be spent on a new school would avoid cost that is otherwise going to be incurred on this, but I thought it was just worth mentioning that that sort of came to be. Really the, conclusions and next steps. So overall, you need about 35% more space for elementary schools. Again, that would not all be accomplished through one project, but it gives you a sense about your need. We think there are really only two viable sites, Killam and Birch Meadow, that without some extraordinary undertaking are the most viable for some expansion or reconstruction. I do want people to be aware that a large school on the Killam site will fully utilize it. It will have to be efficient. We've seen elementary schools from communities up to 900 students, and many of those are designed to try to emulate, two separate schools almost abutting, entrances on separate sides, and kind of really function like two schools. That's not going to be that possible on the Killam site. It's going to be tight enough. We see much bigger schools on smaller sites, but you do not have enough space around a future building in order to, have two separate entranceways and drives and bus parking and all of those. So it will have to have, once inside, it can work a little bit more like two schools, but it should just be understood that, that is not going to be able to particularly be accomplished. A two-site solution will be more expensive, the total cost, and because of the single MSBA project participation at a time, that additional cost would be largely borne by the town. The next steps really, this is the diagram, I'll go through it a little bit with the MSBA. Essentially, these three bars are, this is sort of get prepared and set a direction that you want to do. I'll back up to the steps. This is essentially the schematic design, and this is essentially final design and completing the project construction. So the preparation is after a letter of intent. There is a phase they call eligibility period. It's really assembling things. You get a school building committee together. You refine the enrollment projections. You collect data. There's a lot of information that you have to provide for maintenance and capital spending that you've done on the schools. You have to demonstrate that you've taken care of your buildings, and you have to get local authorization of funding for the next step, not the total cost of the project. We'll talk about the time frame, but this and all of the work that we're presenting tonight and the study that we've done are really things that they look for during this phase. That's to really show that you have considered what you want to do and what direction, and it goes a long ways to helping your odds in the letter of intent process. If you're accepted into the program and are going to move forward, the next stage, as I call it, is schematic design. But essentially, that is to demonstrate what it is you need, how you're going to do it, and what it's going to cost. So essentially, you establish, you hire the architect, you get the owner's project manager, you do a more detailed feasibility study of many of the issues that we're talking about. You actually come up with plans of what the building is, and the town at that point needs to fund the project and make a commitment to it. Not to speak for MSBA, but that reason is to show a commitment before everyone undertakes the large work of the next phase. And then the final is to actually, do the working drawings, construction documents for the school, and construct the project. But after this point, that's when you really sign a contract with MSBA. This is what we're doing. It's real. We funded it, and we're moving forward. And I was going to actually zoom in on that a little bit here, but I've really covered that. So the next step would be, to determine a direction that you would like to go, and if you choose to file a letter of interest for the project. Once doing the letter of interest and you are accepted into that eligibility period, that I was just saying was putting together, this kind of information, your documentation of taking care of the buildings, etc. These are maximum time durations they allow you for each of those. So that top bar is really 270 days, 9 months. This step of assembling the project team, the designer, doing the schematic design, you have around a year and a half here, I think that it totals up to. Once you pull that together, have an estimate, your program, there's a 90-day period that the town and MSBA would work together to really have a contract with each other for what you're going to do. And that is, that's a real decision. And after that point, you really can't mess around with the scope and change considerations, or they won't participate in the cost, is essentially a quick summary. A year to do the final design of the building, and a year and a half for very large projects not applicable to you. That's somewhat malleable. All that together, these are maximum time frames, is 4.8 years, but really, because they overlap, a more practical thing from letter of intent to occupying the school is more like a 3.5 year period. It rarely does it happen much faster than that. And that's really, at that point, I'll stop and answer questions or back up to whatever I can do for you.
Thank you, Dale. So I'll open it up to the committee first, and then if we have any public questions. One of the questions I had, Dale, was on where you mentioned on one of the later slides that were 35% deficiency. Does that contemplate the 3 modulars that we just put in this summer or this fall?
No, it does not. So for long-term planning, I think I'll stop sharing. I can click back on the screen if you want. For long-term planning, basically community and MSBA standards, you don't assume modulars as a long-term solution. Okay. So you bought yourself a little time with those. I mean, there was an immediate need for those, but and that also improves that number right now. You're not really that quite 35%, because you do have those extra classrooms that are not accounted for in your available square footage.
Sean?
Dale, just one question. A few times throughout the presentation, you referred to, you said something like doesn't solve for pre-K. When you say that, are you referring specifically to putting pre-K in one site?
Well, in other words, many of the options we looked at, because you don't have enough space available, it was said, well, for cost and space, we just won't have a solution for pre-K right now. So that assumes it remains at there's a little at Wood End, and then mostly at the high school site, and that would be the current solution. This project, where it wasn't exactly mandated as part of it, would not solve that problem.
So just to be clear, the problem you're defining is that our pre-K is at 2 different sites, one of them being the high school.
Well, mostly that you have 110 students now, and probably it's going to be hard to limit the growth to to anything less than that 175. So you don't have a place to put those additional kids. I should mention, by the way, it was not on the slides, but we did review with NESDEC, and we did do a little bit of work with the high schools and the middle schools space. That the good news for you is this problem doesn't bleed into your middle schools. Your capacity at the middle schools are adequate. The growth as you are away, or you lose some students between elementary school or between middle school and high school. And so we did track that through, that the fact that these kids are coming through does not mean you are right away facing a middle school and high school growth problem, which does happen to many towns.
Dale, you all said, Sean? Dale, one other thing is, I know we've talked in the past that, you know, MSBA really looks at enrollment as kind of one of the top criteria. In our space issues aren't as much enrollment and more programmatic. Where would that, and John, you can disagree with me if I'm wrong on that. I think that's really what it is, right? So where does that kick us down the list a bit? Because it's more of a programmatic as opposed to enrollment to get money from the state?
Of course, not being with MSBA, a little bit speculation, but I think it's better to translate it that the priority is to overcrowding, and not so much distinguishing from enrollment and program. However, typically in the schools, the enrollment is what's driving it. I mean, there are some, you know, communities that are looking at 30% increases in enrollment. So obviously that translates. They also have the program problem. So it goes hand in hand. But I think it's also fair to say you're not probably going to be at the top of the list because of your problems compared to what are happening in some other communities.
Thank you. Carla?
Hi, Dale.
Hi.
A couple of quick questions. Did we decrease the number of schemes or the number of options from the last submission a year ago to now?
No, that we've pushed all of them to a certain point of, you know, let's say conclusion. So in the full study, they are there and documented, you know, with additional data and so on, and just kind of decided for this presentation to talk about the two that seemed the most viable, but the others are all documented and available to you.
And then I have a question, if I can, on Scheme B. It's broken down into two sites, right? Into the Killam site and into Barrows. And you
Birch
said
Meadow. No, Birch
into,
Meadow.
I'm
Yes.
sorry, Birch Meadow. And you said that MSBA will take on one site at a time.
Yes.
So how does that break out cost-wise from how much it will cost for the Killam site versus Birch Meadow site? Do you know?
Well, it's going to be roughly about 15 million or 15 to 20 million at Birch, because that's a much smaller addition, and it's not. It gets to be a little bit of picky math. Not that just because you're building less at the other site, of which you would get, you know, say 60% reimbursement, you know, so it's not exactly a 1-for-1, but order of magnitude, I think that's a fair ballpark.
So you're saying that if we get one site approved, so the Killam site approved initially, and obviously we may not have the need because of the modulars at Birch Meadow, and then when the first site was completed, go to the second site, our chances of getting funding for that probably greatly decreases.
I would think so, yes.
If at all.
Because
Okay.
when that second smaller project comes in, it's not, it's sort of a new list every year. Every year it's a new competition for whose needs. So at some point, you know, when Birch Meadow would come in, you would be, let's say, competing against another community that needs a new school or more.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Tom, did you?
Yeah, I was going there. So Dale, apologies. I'm just trying to go back to the timeline slide with all the different arrows and stuff along those lines. If I recall correctly, both from this time and last time, the town has to vote to approve funding before we know if MB, you know, if they'll joint fund with us. Is that correct, or can you remind me of the order of operations of
that?
Right. So you would do the letter of, in real simple terms, you do the letter of intent, and they would say, yes, we're interested with you. And then if you had that approval, you would embark on a doing this more detailed study and so on, and you would have to cough up some money for that. That is eligible later but that's, let's say, design money, planning money. Then you would go through the schematic design, and then at that point, you would know after you did that initial planning whether you are eligible for the reimbursement. That decision gets made. Then you would do the, let's call it the schematic design. That's basically the second bar. And at the end of that, you would say, this is what we're going to build. This is, how we're going to do it. And this is what it's going to cost. And we have appropriated the money to do it. And the original cost then folds into that reimbursement. And then you would go forward. But at that point, you would commit to, let's say, the full design and construction cost. You would know whether you're in the program or not. And then you would continue on and get it ready to go to construction.
I guess just to clarify my question, I thought I recalled that we wouldn't know what percent necessarily they would reimburse, right? We'd be in the program, but they wouldn't pay, we didn't know if they'd pay 80%, 70%, 60%, 100%. Of the cost overall. Am I misremembering?
No, you would know very close to the percent, because you essentially your community has a percent ranking, and then there are things that you could do by increasing the participation in sustainability and so on. You can get an additional 2%. There are things you can do to manipulate that, but you would know within 5 to 10% of where you're headed. Yes.
Okay.
I guess
There's
do we have the other things set up?
I'll just add quickly to that. There are also things, I don't think directly applicable here, but let's say at a high school, some communities may choose to do a pool or a field house or things that are just not eligible for reimbursement. So that's part of construction costs. I don't think it applies really here, but that's why some communities may not know the percentage for some projects.
okay. Chuck, we did have a question come in, but we also have Erin raise her hand. So,
Yeah, Erin.
Thank you. I'm trying to understand the financial piece. So, is there an average percent that MSBA typically reimburses?
Well,
Or it's really varied?
Well, I get myself in trouble, but comparable communities, you're probably in the mid 60s or 60-ish%, at the, unless you add these other things that are not. But you're not 20%, you're not 90%.
So, Chuck or John Doherty, we would also, I assume, have to go to the town and the voters for a debt exclusion to pay for the rest. So where does that fit in the timeline? Because that's not something that can be instantaneous. And what happens if the voters say no?
If I can, I'll just go back.
Yep.
So again, this is basically, let's call it feasibility study.
Mm-hmm.
Then this is the schematic design. It's here that you have to commit the funding for the project.
Okay.
So
And-
before that, Erin, you would need to request from town meeting funding for the feasibility study and for the schematic design.
Correct.
Okay. And then we would go, potentially we would put a debt exclusion vote before the voters?
Yes.
It'll be a cap.
Probably at this point, yes.
Yeah, it would have to be a debt exclusion, yeah.
Okay.
This would presumably just be funded. Yeah.
But we would know how much we needed covered. We would know what MSBA was covering and what the town would be on the hook for.
Yes.
We go to the voters. Okay. But if they didn't support it, then the project dies.
Correct.
Well, is that the case? Is that the case, Dale? I mean, if they didn't support it, we could still get our 60%, but have to find another way to pay for it, right? Or does
No,
it, does
no,
the
if-
60% contingent upon the town approving to pay the rest?
Correct. So
Okay.
essentially, you know, what happened, this didn't, when you fund this, this is where you, what is called the project funding agreement. So when you are at this point, it goes down in writing, there's a set of plans, this is what we're building, this is what we're doing, we've appropriated the money to do it. So at that point, if you, in that, well, I guess if you didn't get the debt exclusion, this town could still proceed with the project, but
That was
if
what I meant.
okay, yeah, I'm sorry, I misunderstood your point. Yes, it's not,
I mean, I doubt we would, but.
right, you just have to commit to having the money. I don't think they care where
How
you
you
get it.
get
Yeah.
So
Did you say we had other questions, Tom?
we do have a public question from a FinCon member. I'll ask that if you don't mind, and then I'll
Yep.
come back. I wanted to look a little at the math as we're going through this, just to make sure we understood it. So the question from FinCon member Marianne Downing, and it's two parts for a clarifying point. So hear me out a little bit. I have a question about whether it is appropriate or typical to retroactively apply current building space standards of MSBA to all school buildings in a community as part of this. If a district is building one new building, why are they required to make all existing school buildings compliant with current modern school space standards, especially if the existing buildings otherwise are sufficient to hold the student population? To clarify my question is, I understand that new construction must meet MSBA standards, but as part of getting MSBA money, are we also required to make other schools, i.e. those we are not renovating or rebuilding, also compliant with new space standards? Doing that seems to add extra cost and complexity to the proposals, especially if it's not legally required to do for building that we are not renovating. And I think where she's going at this, I'll just put a little to that, is there's this the movement of kids, right? So in order to get down to that standard of 190 or 160, or up to the standard of 160, we have to reduce kids in other schools and readjust, as opposed to we're not doing any other work in any other buildings, obviously, but we're just having to redistrict some kids. So hope that question is clear enough now at this point, Dale.
The answer is no, you are not required to do anything at those other schools. You know, it's not an MSBA requirement. It's, I present it, you know, to a little bit to help people understand it's not a matter of just, you know, moving kids around and you'd be fine. You do have a shortage everywhere. And secondly, just in full disclosure, most communities think about parity a little bit as you go forward, but very, very few, you know, if any, would just go build all new schools and get them all to those standards. But as you delve into the process, it's almost certain you would take some things that are causing pressures in those other buildings and somewhat address it, probably through moving things. Yes, but you're now, I want to be very clear, you are not required to go address all of those other schools.
John?
I have a question from Pat Tompkins from the Permanent Building Committee.
Okay.
Can you ask what the approximate cost of the schematic design would be? And that would need to be approved by the first vote, correct?
Not well.
So I think that what would be the approximate cost? I think it's two different costs, right? You've got the schematic design, you also have the feasibility study. Isn't that two different costs?
Yes, there's that's it. The first step is, you know, is the feasibility study, and that, just by the way, that does put some pressure on the town. There's a lot of record collecting and so on to do that. And then the bigger step, and I think I think it's reasonable to say probably around 250 to, you know, 350,000 or something. I mean, it's that kind of under magnitude for the schematic design portion, you know.
But the feasibility study is much more expensive.
No, that's the feasibility study, and then this, you know, conceptually the schematic design, And to be clear, there's a lot there. I mean, there's an owner's project manager involved, an architect, full engineering and so on. But, that's, far less, say, than I think $1 million or so is.
Okay. Thank you.
The big cost comes at that next hurdle, obviously.
So now, Chuck, if I may,
Yes.
to go and explore. Dale, would you mind putting up the two options again, option A and B, I think it is, so we can see the two costs that are listed there, and using the 60% rough number so we have an idea what we might be asking the town for. So just on this one, the 78 million that's there,
Yes.
that's the number we would have to get funded completely. And 60% of that is the number we think would be covered by MSBA, or is 60% of the 66 million covered by MSBA?
No, mostly 60. I think it's fair to say, the magnitude is 60% of the total project cost of the 78.
Okay, so if we look at that, then we're generally looking at asking for 30 to 32 million in debt exclusion for Scheme A, as it's written. And then Scheme B,
yep.
Looking at the 102 and taking off the 15 to 20 or so that you mentioned that would be part of the Birch related work. We then have to do 2 debt exclusions probably to hit this total number, right? One for the first part, which is Killam, and then so we're in that $33 to $34 million after you take the 60% discount. And then another debt exclusion for the Birch Meadow of 15 to 20 million. So between the two, we're looking at the first one giving us, 32 million of a debt exclusion, and the second one giving us 48 to 53 million or so in total debt exclusions between the two schools, roughly. Does that sound about right?
That sounds about right. Like always, it was hard to get in your head for the math, but conceptually, yes.
Okay. Okay.
Chuck, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Because Dale, I don't want to have a percentage out there that,
No.
Yeah.
my understanding, because of our community, that we're lower than 60%.
Okay.
For some reason, I thought it was like between 45 and 53% or something like that.
And I'll have to apologize because we did this early on, and I didn't recall that you were that low, but you could well be. So I guess we should leave it that we can
Yeah,
check.
I just
back
don't want
to
to
you.
throw a percent out
You
there.
were reading my mind, John, that I think the high school is at 50, right?
Well, the high school was built when it was the old MSBA, so that was under different rules.
But I mean, even so, Dale, and I apologize. I know you just said, when you said the 60%, did you term that an average? Or is that a best case scenario situation?
No, there are communities that
get more than that?
high yes, but I don't think it would apply to Reading, but I have to admit, I still under the department, the old DOE program too, that was a more of a regular percentage. I will say high schools generically tend to have more things that are not covered in the reimbursement. There are a number of things that are excluded. You have a, very large field house, probably exceeded, what would fit in the, the reimbursement. It will not cover like superintendent office areas. I don't know what the situation was when you did your project, but if that was there, that would have been excluded. So, for the main school, the percentage might have been higher than if you took, all the math at the end of the day, it would have looked lower. But we should confirm that and get back to you as best we can with it.
The other thing I'd want to know is I really want to get a better understanding of their short list of what they view as the real drivers as to whether they're going to give, how much they're going to give, and I know we talked about enrollment being one. I think one of the other ones is quality of what's currently there. And I know, again, to go under the category of no good deed goes unpunished. I mean, our buildings are in great shape. And is that going to hurt us? I don't know,
Well, again, not to speak for them too much, that used to be, sort of a catch-22 with the whole thing, but now it is expected the buildings are taken care of, and you sort of have to demonstrate that.
Okay.
So I don't think it counts against you as much as it used to.
Aaron? Did you, or is that an old, am I looking at an old?
That's old, Chuck.
Sorry.
That's an old one, but I did want to make a comment. And it might be related to Mary Ann's question, but part of this would be, the goal would be to get rid of having modular classrooms at all, right? I mean, so we would have to move some students out of Josh Wheaton and Barrows and potentially Birch Meadow if our goal was to not have modulars long term, right? I mean, that's part of the goal here, is a long term permanent solution.
Correct. And that's why they're not like included when you really look at capacities. They're a short term measure to help you to get to your final plan.
Okay. And how long have we had now the ones at Josh Wheaton and Barrows? 5 or 6 years?
We're running on, I think we're on here.
About 5 years?
Yeah, I think it's 5. Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
One more question. If this all went through and the town passed a debt exclusion and we moved forward with everything, at what point would it actually kick in for the town? I'm just wondering where it fits with the library and the high school payoff expiring in 2024 and 2025. Would it kick in towards the end of the completion of the project in terms of the taxpayer money?
It would depend when this project gets approved.
Right.
So it's all about the timing.
But
Okay.
if you look at the schedule that we have right now, you're looking at generally that time frame. If you think about it from going back to the slide he had, there was like a 4.8 years to 3.5 years. If we landed that 4-year point from now, we're pretty much at the end of that runway and starting fresh appropriately.
Okay. That's potentially helpful.
Don't we start, we would start incurring debt at the beginning of the construction period, before the construction period, in fact. So we'd be paying it before the end. We'd have our first payment on that debt before the end of the construction period. So there's probably a gap of 6 months, a year there.
Depending on when we go out for it, right? If we go out for it at the end of the year, we don't have to pay in that year. So it really, it kind of depends.
Yeah.
This is where Bob and all of his forecasting comes in extraordinarily well for us in terms of how we think that, and our debt. I mean, our credit rating as a town as well will be very helpful from a debt perspective on that regard too.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, just one more thing, Dale. Do you have any read on sort of the general economic environment over the next few years? Is it favorable for towns to be, trying to accelerate this kind of work, given that lots of other towns might be in a position where they're not even thinking about it?
It's either exceptionally good, exceptionally bad, or somewhere in between. Yeah, I don't mean to make a smart answer, but especially with what we have outside right now. I don't know. I can tell you there is a lot in the pipeline. I mean, there's some towns that are doing 3 schools at a time, and construction costs are going up. There's probably other people that are better advisors about that than I am. But
One piece which I can't remember now the exact amount, but I believe as part of the Student Opportunity Act, they did raise the amount that MSBA could borrow for their
Yes.
project. So the cap could go
Yes.
higher, which would benefit.
If that goes through, right? So, but
Yeah,
it's
if that
600
goes
million
through.
to 750 million. So it was a $150 million increase in the annual
Yeah.
budget.
All right. Thank you, Dale.
Okay, very
Thanks,
good.
Dale.
Okay, thanks. I guess I'll sign off if you're all set with me.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks
you.
again.
Thanks, Dale.
Have a safe drive home.
All right, thanks.
Okay, next item on the agenda was the high school volunteer program, and I
believe Kate's here,
I see
yes.
Kate's here. Hi, Kate.
Hi there. How's everybody doing?
Thanks.
Good, thanks.
Good. Glad I was able to get on Teams. Microsoft was not working for me earlier, and so Teams seems to be okay. So I'm really pleased to be able to give you an update that we were given the green light to explore using community volunteers to cover satellite classrooms at Reading Memorial High School in order to make good on our original hybrid model to really see if that's feasible. And I'm actually partnering with Carla in her role as a parent to try to elicit volunteers. There may be some staff watching who might be a little bit nervous about this, and so I want to share a little bit about the process. And Carla and I are taking this in a very thorough manner. So we're looking to recruit volunteers from the community, not necessarily Reading Memorial High School parents. We have criteria, age criteria, and whatnot. In order to become a volunteer, individuals would need to fill out the Sign Up Genius that Carla is going to talk about in a minute, be at least 18 years old, high school diploma, and or older and more qualified, as the case may be. They need to get quarried at the high school. They need to get fingerprinted, and then we're going to be implementing some training sessions. And the training sessions will be virtual to start. Approximately 2 hours in length is what we're anticipating. And the training would include technology training that Chuck Strout would provide, and sort of what the satellite classroom looks like, screenshots, how to set things up. It would include training on health protocols to ensure that the volunteers are up to speed on all of the health protocols that are required at school. It would include protocols about their expectations for what they would be doing, as well as privacy and confidentiality agreements. There'd be an agreement that each volunteer would need to sign. And then some behavioral, sort of what kind of behaviors to expect in the classroom, who to reach out to for help if there are behaviors, student behaviors in the classroom, and that would be sort of my piece. There would be a shorter in-person training, really in a sample satellite classroom where they would practice logging onto a computer, making sure they knew how the setup worked from the laptop to the smart board. So we're pretty excited. For me, we devised what we believed was a robust hybrid plan that, due to staffing issues, we were not able to implement. I really do believe that that is our responsibility to pursue this, to see if we can get enough volunteers in order to make good on the initial hybrid model. So I'm really excited to partner with Carla to see if we can do this. And Carla, do you want to share kind of the process?
Sure. So thank you, Kate. Kate, can you put on mute maybe for a minute? That might help the echo. Thank you, Kate. So this is a really unique experience and position that we're in, where this is a combination of volunteers and quote unquote employees. So it's kind of that hybrid mix. This volunteer program would bring us back to bring the students back to a full hybrid model. We would like to implement this. We would like to roll it out starting November 30th, which is the Monday after Thanksgiving, until December 23rd. And then if all goes well, then we will have a phase 2 of the rollout, which will happen after winter break. So just a little bit about it. We are asking, so we are going to need 20 volunteers per day for 15 days for phase 1. So that is a total of 300 volunteers. We would love for people to sign up for multiple days. It would be easier, but we understand it is December and people are busy. We all know that Reading is its best when we all come together for a common purpose. And we've seen that during these times that we've been all at home, and what we did for our seniors and how we have donated to the food pantry and things like that. So we're, as Kate said, we're really excited about it. The rollout will happen tonight on social media. When I finish with this meeting, I'm going to send out a sign up genius, and we're asking people to sign up for a day, a full day. And we've qualified what a full day is, a full school day. You can sign up for a single day. We would love for you to sign up for multiple days. Kate talked about a little bit about the qualifications. You need to be 18 years of older, have a high school degree. You need to be quarried, and you need to be fingerprinted. The fingerprinting does cost $35. You need to sign a volunteer agreement and take a 2-hour online training that we are going to do over Zoom, and we are going to have a lot of good information there, and a short in-person training as well. So all of my contact information, I'm trying to kind of help out the high school and take some of this pressure off of them. So I will be a contact person. I will have all my contact information. So please feel free to call me. And we're really excited. We really want to get the kids back to school. We would love for the teachers to be happy, and we would like to work with the teachers and just make this experience the best that it can be for our students. In terms of volunteers, you don't have to be a high school parent. You don't have to be a high school parent. You could just be a parent in the district or just someone in the community who would like to donate some time and help out for a good cause to get these kids back in the building. So thank you.
Carly, can I just add one additional kind of safeguard that we had talked about, is that in order to kind of maintain privacy and perhaps not embarrass a high school student to having their parent in the satellite classroom, we would want the, if it was a high school parent, they would not be partnered in a class where their child is enrolled, to create that sense of separation. I think that makes sense. If I were a high school student, I would be mortified if my parent were in my class with me.
And one more thing is we are asking parents to be part of and supervise a satellite classroom, and they could also be asked to maybe participate or help oversee lunch duty as well. But there will be a teacher. The teacher is teaching the classroom. The volunteer will just be there to really aid and assist the students in that classroom.
Thank you, Carla and Kate. This is great. I really appreciate it. Tom, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. Well, first I have a statement, then a question. Thank you is the statement. Thank you for the time, effort, energy, partnership, and agreement to get it done and work it forward, is the statement. The question I have is, some of us have already been quarried and fingerprinted for other activities. Is that on record with the district already? And it would apply in this case. We don't need to do it again necessarily, as long as it's within the statute of limitations, the 2-year or 3-year limit that's there.
Fingerprinting is a one-time thing, believe it or not. The quarry is every 3 years.
Okay. And so, Carla, in your SurveyMonkey in that, would that be something you would ask them to say so that that's known ahead of time from a processing perspective?
So we are going to be keeping track of all of these things. And yes, the person, you can't actually check that off in the SurveyMonkey unless we pay for a subscription, which we're not doing. But if you've already been quarried and fingerprinted, you do not have to do that again, which is good news. The tricky part of this is we have about 2 weeks to get all of these people through the pipeline. So if you think about it, if there are 300 volunteers, we have a lot of things to do in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So we're asking people to sign up right away so we can take them through that process. So.
One more follow-up question, if I may, and this may be more for us as a committee. $35, if you do that times 300 people, that's a significant chunk of change. Hopefully it's not going to be 300 people, but if $35 is a barrier from somebody being able to volunteer for one reason or another, is that something we as a district can reimburse or ask the PTO to help reimburse, or otherwise think about how to help defray those costs if anybody wants to volunteer but can't do the $35?
So we actually would not be able to. We do not do it currently for employees.
Okay.
Tom, I know with the other, like I got fingerprinted because of Chorus,
So did I.
so that I
Yeah.
could drive a bus.
Yeah.
The parent organization actually is the one that paid for it. So we may want to reach out to the PTO and say, you know, we're trying to get hybrid going in full. Would you be able to, if the circumstances warrant it, cover a parent if there's financial need? And I don't think the PTO, because it's benefiting all students, I don't think the PTO would have much of an issue with it.
I think that's a worthwhile ask in this case, potentially, of the PTO. I'm not going to speak for them because I'm not, a board member. They have to make that decision themselves, but at least the ask can go out there. And even if I would even say this, if they want to put together a specific fundraising drive to help support that, that might be another way to help in that regard. So those of us that could potentially do it from a financial perspective, but can't do it from a time perspective, could help in another way. It's the time, talent, and tithe conversation. You have time to give, you have tithe to give, maybe you have talent to give as well, but some way, somehow we can make this thing happen for people.
I can reach out to the PTO. Happy to do that. That's a great idea.
Thank you.
Sean?
I had the same question. If the PTO is a viable option, that's great. And I think it's worth going down that path. To contextualize it though, yeah, $35 times 300 is a chunk of change, but those 300 days, even if each person only did one day, those 300 days if they were paras would cost us, 3 or 4x that, right? So maybe 3x that. So we should find I think we should find a way to eliminate that barrier if we can at all.
I would not like anybody to not sign up because of the money. And so if people have issues, if they could just run it by me, that would be great. I would not, the most important piece of it is the time piece of it. And I know whenever I've done activities at the school, there are so many people who would say, I can't help you out, but I'm happy to buy, throw $20 at the cause and help you out in that way. So there are different opportunities for people.
Great.
Anyone else?
Not to sidetrack this, but that's great for the paras and what we need there, lunch coverage. What about the 3 part-time, the long-term teachers? Is that going to hold any of this up?
It should not.
Okay.
We're working on solutions.
Yep. I have some things in the pipeline for those.
Yeah. Aaron, I like your fingers crossed on that one.
Okay, thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Kate.
Carla.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kate, John, want to do the goals now?
Is that what you would like to do next? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna pull up the I'm gonna flip through these slides first. Okay, so in your packet is a draft, and I emphasize draft because it's going through a few phases with the committee here. This is really part one to give you an opportunity to get the context of the plan. We're also doing the same thing with our district leadership team. I introduced it formally on Tuesday to them, and then next Tuesday we're going to have a subsequent discussion. So the strategy behind the development of this plan, because this is such an unusual year, we had some things that we had started pre-COVID, then were put kind of on hold, and then we'd like to continue them. So you have those groups of initiatives going on, but then you also have things that have been happening during COVID, which are very worthwhile educational initiatives that we want to also make sure that we capture. So what we want to do with year one, which is this current year, is to focus on the hybrid learning piece and then any initiatives that we were already working on pre-COVID. And I'll get into that in more detail in a bit. Really, from a capacity standpoint, we really couldn't do more than that this year with everything going on. We would also start developing baseline data for surveys, focus groups. We have no idea what state assessments are going to look like. As you know, MCAS was put on hold last spring. It's unclear what's going to happen this year with MCAS. The commissioner, in order for the commissioner to put MCAS on hold again, he would need both a waiver from the federal government and the legislature to change the law to give him that ability, which is what happened last spring. So of course that's going to be dependent on how the pandemic unfolds. So what I think would be prudent is to develop this year as year one of baseline data, rather than use previous years, since really with the gap of no assessments last year, combined with a change in the way we have been teaching now through hybrid learning, that it may be prudent to develop a new set of baseline data and then build from there in years 2 and 3. And then in years 2 and 3, you continue to work on the other areas: curriculum instruction, equity, capital, safety. I think it's also important to note that this provides a blueprint and a template for the next superintendent. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be followed, but if you're a new superintendent coming into a district, you're going to focus your first 6 to 8 months on an entry plan. So you can get to know the community, so that you can ask all the right questions, so you can see what are the issues that need to be worked on. This provides that transition time for years 2 and 3 for the new superintendent to be able to use the plan. So that was the basis of the strategy behind developing it this way. I wanted to give you some definitions that are actually in the district improvement plan itself. One is called the strategic objectives, which there are 3, and I'll get into those in more detail in a minute. This is your overarching goals and your key levers for improvement that will achieve the vision. You also have your strategic initiatives, which feed into the strategic objectives, and these are the projects and programs that are going to support those objectives. So that's the how. Then you have your outcomes, in which there are 2 types. There are the interim outcomes and there are the final outcomes. These are the expected results, what they will be, how they will be measured, what they will occur, when will they occur. These are these basically are SMART goals. which are specific and strategic, they're measurable, they're action-oriented, they're rigorous, they're realistic, results-focused, timed, and tracked. The interim outcomes are how you measure from year 1 to year 2, year 2 to year 3, or some other increments of those years. And then your final outcomes would be at the end of a goal, whether it be a 1-year goal or a 3-year goal. Those are the targets for improvement achieved at the end of the plan implementation. So I wanted to give you those definitions before we moved any further, because you'll be hearing some of these terms. So the first one is strategic objective A, and assuming that we're going to do hybrid learning for this year only, this would be a 1-year goal, but certainly it could expand past this year if we have to continue to change the way we do school. So basically, we'll build a foundation of teaching and learning practices, infrastructure changes, assessment practices, and operations efficiencies to prepare schools for current conditions and future challenges in a post-pandemic world. So some of these strategic initiatives that we would do is, and some of these are already happening, develop and implement the fall reopening plan, strengthening our remote learning, identifying assessments for both in-person and remote learning, continue the NEASC work, and develop a vision of the graduate. This would be all under the initiatives for this objective. Strategic objective B. This is really the meat. This is the curriculum, the instruction, the assessment piece. It's the coherent instructional systems planned. This would be a 3-year goal. So based on our data that we'd be developing, the baseline data, we'll evaluate and refine standards-based instructional systems to meet the needs of all learners. So some of the highlights of this strategic objective, these would be some of the initiatives. Some of these were already in the plan for this year from last year. So we want to continue doing those. So this is the implementation of the 5-year curriculum overview and examination cycle in all curriculum areas, implementing the 5-year special education program review cycle, developing entrance and exit criteria for students entering district special education programs as appropriate, completion of the curriculum guides pre-K to 12, implementing universal design for learning, selecting and implementing a high quality universal screening assessment for K to 5 students, developing and implementing an early literacy screener, and developing and implementing a plan to improve early literacy skills. And I know that Chris is going to talk a lot about this in her curriculum presentation at the next meeting. Strategic objective C is also would be a 3-year goal. So based on the data, both qualitative and quantitative, the school district will review equity and social justice practices, analyze student social emotional growth, and refine systems of support to ensure a healthy and successful learning community while meeting the unique needs of students. So some of the initiatives for this objective would include doing an equity audit of the school district and then developing an action plan based on that audit, using the DESE Safe and Supportive Schools Framework tool to assess the effectiveness of schools from a safe and supportive lens, providing professional development in social emotional learning, trauma, equity, and diversity, developing student programs that focus on equity and diversity, revising the handbooks for middle and high school that reflect updated policies and equity practices, developing and implementing a plan to recruit, select, and retain a diverse workforce in the school district, developing a leadership academy for aspiring school leaders, working with public safety to review the efficacy and implementation of all safety drills, continuing elementary space needs and enrollment study, and prepare recommendations to the school committee and community, and then work with the town manager to continue to develop a school capital plan that focuses on health and safety issues. So some of the interim outcomes that we would look at, as I mentioned earlier, using the 2020-2021 school year as the baseline data year, and then seeing 2% increases on our state and local assessments from year 1 to year 2 and year 2 to year 3, both for state, local assessments and survey data. An increase in percent participation on AP exams from year 1 to year 2 and from year 2 to year 3. Developing and identifying one common district assessment at each grade level, K to 8, per subject area at the end of year 1, and then begin implementation of those in year 2. And then during the 2020-2021 school year, 10% of our teacher interviewees will be identified as people of color, 15% in 21-22 school year, and 20% in the 2022-23 school year. And then the final outcomes you could see here, measuring success of our hybrid model by surveying and conducting focus groups, 90% engagement on remote learning, decrease in the achievement gap by 10% on state and local assessments between year 1 and year 3, 10% of the cohort of students reaching expected benchmarks on the 10% of an increase. That should be not just 10%. Expected benchmarks on the K-2 AMC assessments by December of this year, publishing of all curriculum guides. Also by December, 5-year cycle for special education program review. With we'd have also program descriptions for each special education program with entrance and exit criteria for some programs, and then vision of the graduate would be approved in May 2021. So I guess I'll stop here for this part, Chuck, before I move on to the superintendent's goals.
Yes. Sean?
Yeah, 2 questions. One is, John, can you talk a little bit about what an equity audit would entail? Like what would we be looking at from a data perspective there? And then the second question was, I'm thinking about potentially the equity audit, but also the in Objective A, there was something about an audit of our hiring practices and recruitment practices and things like that. Have we thought about engaging a third party for any of that, just to ensure we're not sort of working from a blind spot?
So I'll speak to the equity audit first. They do have tools that exist out there that you could use internally with a committee. You also could hire someone to do a full equity audit. Obviously, that comes with a cost. So those options do exist. With the other piece, there is, and Gail mentioned this in the last meeting, there is actually a document that DESE just put out on how to create a diverse teacher workforce. And it really, it's a toolkit that essentially walks you through the process that you would use. So I don't believe you would need an outside consultant or someone like that for that piece.
So the audit would be evaluating our practices against that as a framework, essentially?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Anyone else? Okay, John.
Okay. So the goals piece mirrors some of the pieces of the strategic objectives, and they were purposely done that way. There were 4 goals. 2 of them are brand new. One of them is been modified a little bit, and one is essentially the same as last year, with the dates changed because of the pandemic put a halt to it. So this one, the first goal, aligned with strategic objective C. This is the talent diversification and leadership development strategy goal. The success of this plan will be evidenced by an increase in pipeline development, recruitment, and retention of staff of color. And you can see that, you know, we've put a increase of 300%, which currently we have 6 staff members of color. It would be an increase to 24 by the end of the 2022-2023 school year. Goal 2, which Dr. Stice put a lot of time and effort into helping me develop, really focuses on reading. And so during the 2020-2023 school years, we will improve our literacy evaluation process, enhance our reading instructional strategies, and structure our progress monitoring more effectively for students who are struggling readers. Based on our work, we will see progress as evidenced by reviewing previous case studies of students who struggled with Tier 2 interventions and comparing the following: an increase in identifying struggling readers earlier, students demonstrating growth on their IEP literacy goals, and fewer out-of-district placements with significant learning disabilities. So obviously this is a very important goal. We've had a lot of discussion in the community in both and in the district with these areas. The third goal is the vision of the graduate, which essentially is the same goal as last year, only we've updated the dates to reflect a May 2021 ending, which would align with the NEASC accreditation process. And then the fourth goal is to build and implement an infrastructure and a set of policies and procedures that will support physical and psychological safety. We'll be using staff surveys, student surveys to help achieve this goal for this year. So the process at this point, a suggested process. So we're reviewing this draft with the district leadership team and the directors. I would like to meet with each school committee member next week to answer any additional questions you may have prior to our next meeting. I can also, I'll have the community, if the community wants to give any input, they can schedule office hours or submit questions. If there's an appetite, I could even hold a community forum, but I know there's a lot going on right now with that, so I was probably going to try to not do that, but I'm more than happy to. And then the school committee would vote on plan at November 19th meeting.
John, are you all set? Can I ask a question, or do you
Yes,
still?
Nope, thank you.
So, I guess something. Well, you just said you'll meet with us individually. I guess something I'd like to get out of that meeting is, you know, I see all the goals. I'm interested in the steps that are going to be, you know, the work that's going to be used to achieve that goal. You know, and who's going to be involved in that. You know, specifically like with goal 1, you know, the increase from 6 to 24, is that going to heavily involve a new HR person or?
Yeah, so in the actual plan, Chuck, the goal is laid out step by step.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in the there's a whole goal with action steps.
So we can go over that when we
Yes,
meet.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Tom, or excuse me, John Parks.
Thanks, Chuck. 2 things, John. One, I'd love to see, I know this is coming up quickly for you, and we don't have an exit plan for you as of yet. So I'd love to see that added to your goals for this year. I know that's hard to think about, but it's definitely something that's going to be needed and should be in that superintendent's goals for this year. 2, how do we focus on attracting persons of color? And I know I've read through this document already. We're going to meet individually. We as a district have always had a challenge in bringing in persons of color into the district. We're looking at the steps, you know, we can advertise, we can post. You've got a pretty significant jump from 6 to 24 in a 3-year time frame. And we've always had a challenge bringing in, even attracting interviewees. Do you see that as a reasonable goal?
So that's not just teachers, John, that's staff, total
Yep.
staff.
Okay, but
So
you
I
see
was
that
looking
as a
at
reasonable
total
goal?
staff, not just teachers.
Is that it, Tom? John?
Yep, I'm good for now.
Tom?
So I have a question, but I think there's a public question that goes right along with John, so I think it would flow right in here, Chuck, if you don't mind. Again, Marianne Downing, FinCom. I have a question. This is not in my FinCom app. Okay. I think the goal of shooting for 20% of teacher interviewees or staff interviewees being people of color is very admirable. However, per DESC in the teacher population, only 11% of the teacher population is non-white. How can you ensure 20% of interviewees are people of color when the pool of interviewees is 89% white? And then that is, what steps are you going to take to get this many applicants of color, especially if there's not that many in the pool? So it's a little bit more of a drill into John's question. And maybe we don't have the answer yet, but that's the question out there.
Well, the answer to the question is that we're going to obviously rely heavily on the document that DESE has provided, which outlines a lot of those steps. And part of this is you have to develop a culture where you will be able to attract candidates of color. So that's the year one. That's what you should be doing year one with your equity conversations.
Okay, so the culture is very important. I'll just ask a little bit more in that, but I think there's a reality of the percentage number in terms of meeting the goal. Would it be more achievable to do maybe a 5, 7.5, and 10% step up over the 3-year period, as opposed to the 10, 15, and 20%? Trying to make sure it's achievable. Part of SMART is achievable, right? That's the A in SMART. So that's just food for thought to see what we can do there. To even 10% improvement in the pool is a big improvement and in the right direction. Just trying to make sure we're setting ourselves up to succeed.
That's good feedback. Thank you.
My other questions, if I still have the mic, is goal number 2. It says in fewer out-of-district placements with significant learning disabilities. I was wondering if that wording should be specific as opposed to significant.
Yeah, it's specific. That's an error on my part. Thank you.
Okay. And then the goal number 4 on this list here, I think it goes into detail in the detail. It's still a little vague. I'm wondering if there's a little more specificity that we can put in the goal around the evidence of, the positive responses in Pride. Are we looking at a specific section of that survey versus our YRBS, and again to the achievable portion of it, or do we think we're going to be able to execute YRBS this year in the current climate that we're in as we go through that as well?
YRBS, just so you know, the Middlesex League has already made that commitment.
Okay, great. So then if we can just look at a category or maybe that school climate there's a lot in that school climate, if I remember right, from looking at the details. So if there's a specific 1 or 2 sections we want to target there to make it, again, an achievable goal that we can go after, would that be good feedback or good request, or hope so, as we go through that?
Thank you.
Overall, I'll just add one more final thing. The specificity in this document is great to see. I think there's a lot more specificity in terms of what we're trying to achieve in this document overall than what we've seen in the past, and I just want to thank you for that. It looks like you put a lot of thought into it. I hope the next question especially is, as you've gone through this with the principals, and going back to that A word, do they think it's achievable as well, right? Is that something they can sign up for as well as they look through this? I know this has a trickle-down effect to some of the school improvement plans as well as we go through it. So that would be my other point of feedback as we meet next week, is how are the principals responding from an achievability perspective? Are they saying that this is something we can achieve or not. And if we do, if we need to adjust it down or up, maybe they're going to say this is too easy.
Say that.
Right?
Well, in
so the
theory,
principals-
we shouldn't be asked to vote on it if they haven't said they can achieve it, right? Right?
So
I
Well,
mean,
the school improvement plans
principals,
for sure, yeah.
we've already had that conversation. The principals are essentially focusing on 2 areas this year. And my guess is you'll see similar words in their plans that you see in this plan, and it's really the hybrid learning and the equity. Those are the 2 major areas that they're going to be focusing on.
Thank you.
anyone else? Good job, John.
I
Thank you.
appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
Now we want to do the fall opening. I think that might have been the first part of your PowerPoint.
And that's fine. We'll just go right back to it. Okay, so this first part, we've already communicated to the community, but I just want to again inform the committee and the community. We had a pretty busy weekend, as you saw by the communications that was going out in identifying what was going on. So we have had 8 students test positive at the high school, and over 80 students that were quarantined from the close contact with the positive cases. None of the students that tested positive had been in school yet due to the phase-in. They were all freshmen and sophomores. But a lot of them were linked to athletics. In fact, the vast majority were linked to athletics, extracurricular activities. As a result, out of an abundance of caution, I felt it was necessary to to try to minimize community spread, to have all of the in-person extracurricular and athletic activities canceled until November 13th. So that has been currently going on. I know that Tom Zayer is going to try to reschedule as much as he can the games that were missed. We technically can play games until the 21st of November. So there may be some games back-to-back Saturday, Sunday. That weekend we may do one in the middle of the week, but we'll play that by ear. I will also let you know that all of the health and safety protocols have been followed for all of this. We've been working very closely with the Board of Health. Mary Juliana has been, and the other nurses, I believe Sharon Grakow has also been helping out with the town, have done an amazing job. And I want to make sure that I recognize that. So that's the situation at the high school. There is a nexus from the high school to Birch Meadow. We did have a staff member test positive. That because of that, we had 13 staff members, including the principal, the secretary, some paraeducators, and some teachers that have been quarantined for 14 days for close contact. That will continue until the end of next week. Julia Hendricks has done an amazing job putting together a staffing plan to allow school to continue this week and next week during the quarantine. At this point, all of the staff members so far have tested negative, that the tests have come back, which is a good sign. The school came back yesterday to hybrid. We did make Monday a remote day. Tuesday was a remote day for the entire district. We felt it would be a good idea to have remote day on Monday just to make sure we weren't missing anything. Fortunately, the way that our schedule is set up with the 4 days on and then the 1 week remote, we had a whole new cohort of students and teachers in this week. So, and because this all happened prior to Friday, we had already done our deep cleaning and disinfecting on Friday as part of our plan. So the model that we've put forward actually did help support us in this situation. In order for them to make the coverage work, a few things. One is Chris Kelly is right now the on-site building principal for Birch Meadow. Obviously, Julia is doing a lot of remote support. We do have a staff member from Extended Day that is the on-site secretary. The nurse was did not have close contact. And so out of an abundance of caution, we did wait for her test results. She was negative, so she's back. So we don't have to have substitute nurse coverage, which is good. We are using 2 paraeducators from other schools because we're not fully hybrid yet. We were able to take 2 paraeducators from other schools to help support having the students be in at Birch Meadow this week and next week. And as I mentioned, all the health and safety protocols were followed.
John, I think John Parks had a question.
Sure.
Actually, Tom was up in front of me, Chuck.
I thought that was earlier. Tom? Go ahead, John.
Yeah, John, as far as practices and athletics and everything being canceled, that includes all captains' practices. There should not be any of that going on, correct?
That is correct. We actually don't have, our school is not sanctioning any captain's practices.
Okay.
Tom?
I think that was from the previous segment, Chuck.
I did too, yeah, okay. Go ahead, John.
Okay. So we have a revised timeline. And this is what you see up above. As you know, I've said many times, our remote instruction is primarily synchronous. Our teachers are doing an amazing job with that. And again, I want to, thank them for all of their hard work. I know that they are working harder than ever in this new world of education. I also want to thank our parents for their continued patience and flexibility as we went through going through this phase in. I know originally we wanted all students in by the end of October. Unfortunately, we were not able to do that. However, due to the hard work of our community with the job share, we have been able to fill pretty much all of the positions now at the elementary level. So as a result of that, this week grade 3 came in for the first time, 9 and 10. Next week, cohort B for grade 3 will be coming in. And then starting on the 16th, we will stop bringing in grade 4 and 5. So cohort A will be in the week of the 16th. Cohort B will be in the week of the 23rd. People are probably asking, why can't you do this next week? It really is because we've got so many staff out at Birch Meadow that are quarantined until the end of next week. We physically could not do it at Birch Meadow next week. And we are still using staff to help support the Birch Meadow quarantine next week, as I mentioned earlier. So right now we're down to 1 lunchroom paraeducator and 1 cohort B tutor. Those are both at Wood End. It's an amazing change from 2 weeks ago when that number was much higher. And again, I want to give credit to the principals who have been doing lots of interviews. Every time I've been getting an email from a person who is interested in inquiring, I'm giving it to the principals and they're immediately contacting those people to see what their availability is. So principals have done an amazing job. The high school, we've already had that discussion this evening. The volunteer program, hopefully, if we can get that moving, will certainly help with this. We feel we do have some leads on the long-term teacher positions or possible solutions. I think Carla has a question.
Carla?
John, for the high school, I believe those positions are in addition to the volunteers that we have. So in terms of like the regular ed para educators, I believe they're still looking for those 10.
Oh yeah, we're still looking. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Just want to make sure.
I think that would reduce the number of volunteers we would need. It would offset. Yes.
Thank you.
John Parks had a question, Chuck.
He already asked.
Oh, great. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Aaron has a question.
Okay.
I'm just curious, when you, when we put the word out that we really needed paras at the elementary level, we got a lot of applications, particularly from parents. You have put the word out, I think twice now, about the need at the high school. Have we gotten any response for those jobs?
A few, not as many as we did for elementary. We've gotten a couple, maybe 3, I think.
Okay. So the goal would be still to continue to try to fill those with
Yes.
the volunteer program acting as a bridge.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Three last pieces in this latest update. Oh, I think Tom's got a question.
Sorry, just a quick info share, I guess, for Aaron's question. I've had a couple of conversations with other parents in the district who are comfortable volunteering at the elementary level, but are not, or going for a para position at the elementary level, but are not comfortable at the high school level just because of the difference in need. So that's part of it, I think, unfortunately. It'd be great if we can get some of those to be comfortable at the high school level too, but there's a perceived difference in challenge, I guess, from dealing with, 3, 4, 5, 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders versus 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders that I've had in some of my conversations. I don't know if anybody else has seen that, but I'm hopeful that people will change their mind in that regard.
Okay, thanks. John?
Thanks, Chuck. 3 other items, and the first one I've said before, but I feel that I need to say it again. It was ironic that during the meeting this evening, I got a call from the state, you probably did too, telling us that the cases are going up and that we need to follow precautions. But we're doing everything we can when students are in school to provide the safe environment for them. But we can't do a lot when they're outside of school. And the cases that we currently have are because precautions were not followed in the community setting. So I put that plea out there to parents and students and other community members to please follow the health precautions. We obviously want to keep schools open, and we would appreciate if all of those health precautions that you're doing in school that are also done outside of school. The 6 feet, the wearing of the mask, the hand sanitizing, all of those are absolutely critical. It doesn't do us any good if we do it in school, but then we're not doing it outside of school. So I just put that out there again as another plea. Travel restrictions, just again as a reminder that now that we're entering the holiday season soon, that when families are leaving the state, there are travel restrictions that they need to either quarantine or have the test within 72 hours. So please keep that in mind. There is an age restriction on that. I believe 10 and under do not have to get the test, but Obviously, we would recommend and encourage families to have the test for 10 and under, because obviously those are school-age children as well. And then the last piece is we are pleased to announce that we do have a person for our HR director. And we will be announcing that name later, but we do have a person, and we're working out the contractual details with that, and the person will be starting the first week in December. So we're very excited to welcome that person on board. And then I just want to conclude, like we have the last few times, with some student photos from this week, so that the community can see what school is actually looking like. I mean, it's amazing. I've had the opportunity to go into all the schools. I try to get into all the schools each week to see what's going on, and the kids have been great. They really have been great to see what's going on. This is a kindergarten class at Barrows, and my understanding is they are learning the tales of Billy Goat Gruff with the teacher. This is a grade 3. This is their first week back at Barrows. This is Rise, and it looks like these are some future engineers building some structures. We have our Rise outside, and they're doing some sensory work, and I believe that this was a result of funding from REF, maybe last year or the year before. So the students are enjoying that at the Rise playground. They also, you could see, are using our Turf 2 field. Part of our Rise program now is right near Turf 2. So that group, which they call the Treehouse classrooms, are use this area quite frequently for their outdoor recess and activities, physical education. The good news is pretty much the weather has been great, other than that snowstorm that we had that one day and some rain, but in the next week or so is going to be good as well. Birch Meadow cafeteria, students eating lunch, socially distant. Barrows 3rd grade doing outdoor reading activities. You could see everyone is socially distant. Very beautiful day to do that. A lot of outdoor learning is going on, more so than normal, understandably so. Student pictures look different. This is the way we're doing student photos now in some of our schools. This is at Coolidge. Coolidge was doing some outside random acts of kindness activities. So students were outdoors writing with chalk different phrases for random acts of kindness. We have Wood End. I want to say these are 2nd graders maybe at Wood End, outdoors playground. So again, some student photos to see that a lot of good things happening. It may look different, but a lot of engaged learners. And again, thank you to the teachers and the administrators for everything that they're doing.
Great, thank you, John. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay, we'll go on to back to the second reading of policy JLCB. I guess that was tabled.
Correct. I can pull it from the table.
Yes.
So motion to take the second reading and approval of policy JLCB, immunization of students, from the table.
Second.
Sean?
Aye.
John? Carla?
Aye.
Aaron?
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
And Chuck? Okay. Yeah, I think there was a memo in the packet.
Do you want me to just give the context, Chuck?
Yes.
So I did go back and I looked at MGL Chapter 76, 15, and changed the verbiage of the first sentence to reflect the law, the language of the law. I also included a document that Mary Juliana gave me on all of the required vaccinations for your information. Then I also included the state, the statement from the state that they gave us that the influenza vaccine is now a required vaccine for school attendance and will be required as of December 31st for all students in kindergarten to grade 12. So that's the those are the changes with that policy, and I think I addressed all of the questions that came up also.
Tom?
So, first of all, thank you, John, for the continued follow through and updates as we were discussing before. The only question I think we still had, or I had, and the committee was debating, was the note and whether to leave the note in there at the bottom, right?
Right.
So we had no formal agreement on that or not, but considering the immunization policy, as I'll renew my question on that, has basically taken out all of the specific vaccinations and just basically referred to the time by time Department of Public Health. I'm wondering if we want to just remove that note and just refer to those as they are. That way we don't have to come back and cross that note out or anything else like that at a future point in time.
Anyone have any on that?
The one thing I'm struggling with a little bit, and I know this is our fault for the way that we've been discussing this. John, in your memo, you talk about flu being a little bit different. We should encourage and educate and encourage families to vaccinate, but not necessarily exclude. We would be, if that were the case, if a family opted not to get a flu vaccine and we opted not to exclude after, several rounds of discussion and pleading with them to get the vaccine and so forth, we would be violating this policy to admit those students, I think, unless they have one of the exceptions that's called out here, right? The written statement.
Medical or religious.
Yeah. So to bring it back to your question, Tom, the reason that I tend to be in favor of leaving the note in is that it at least creates a little bit of a distinction between the flu vaccine, which is, sort of different and new, versus the standard vaccination course, where we'd expect that policy to be enforced much more cleanly. So that's kind of where I land on this. It gives us a little bit of an out if we're really expecting this policy to be somewhat flexible on the flu vaccine.
Anyone else?
I guess Erin had her hand up before. I don't know if she wanted to chime in or agree, but.
Oh, I'm sorry, Erin. I didn't see that. Erin?
Now I'm not sure. I was gonna say that I was okay with removing it because I had been one of the people to object to removing it last week. But Sean brings up a really good point. I also sort of struggle with writing a policy if we're saying outright we're not going to enforce the policy. I have a problem with that.
Well, where I was going to go then was, the enforcement aligns to, or lack of enforcement aligns to the two exceptions that are listed, right? So if somebody had written or has an exception on a religious basis or a doctor's note, theoretically, we can't really question their religious basis for that exception either, I would say. So those two exceptions are in the policy as it stands, and the note doesn't make that exception, those two exceptions, any different, right, than anything else. I agree with your point though, Sean. Maybe we just leave it in, but then I just think we're gonna have to come back to this at some point in time, hopefully, and take it out. But I'm not hard and fast. I just wanted to make sure we made the decision or didn't leave it there without having a decision.
Just to circle back, it's not necessarily a bad thing to circle back to this next year and see how this plays out this year. I mean, it's the first time the state has mandated it. It's the first time we're in the middle of a pandemic. Like it's not a bad idea to come back to this next year and see where we ended up falling with the enforcement and with the follow through of families in town.
John, what is our liability if we don't enforce things? Liability in terms of a family, not this family, but another family gets sick because of one of these kids comes in and gets somebody sick. We were kind of lackadaisical on our enforcement.
Well, I think we have to make a good faith effort with each family and work with them. And that's why I think the route we would go is to look at one of the exemptions for those families that refuse.
Sure. I'm all confused on the chat here. Aaron went, Tom went, John, did you have?
You're on mute, John.
All right, Teams is not responding very well tonight. I don't see a problem with leaving this in. It's a governor's order, and basically that's what it's saying. It's going to be there until the governor makes that change. I don't see our current governor making that change to remove the influenza shot anytime soon. So I'm actually okay with it staying in.
Carla,
I'm fine either way, honestly. My gut is telling me just to keep it in, just because it's just kind of a unique experience. But if everybody wanted to get rid of it, I'd be fine with that too. It doesn't change the intent of the procedure, and it doesn't change what needs to be done. So my vote, if I had to right now, would be to keep it in, I believe.
okay. Did Sean, you already spoke, right? I didn't. Yeah.
That was new, but I'm good. We're such great. I'm good.
Something is wrong. All of a sudden, things show up on here, and they weren't. I'm not falling asleep here. I'm watching it. I guess we'd be ready for a vote. So Tom?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Carla?
Aye.
Aaron?
Aye.
Chuck? Aye. Okay, we now have to take take AC off was that on the table as well?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
So move to take the second reading and approval of policy AC, non-discrimination and harassment, from the table.
Is there a second?
Second.
Tom,
What?
your
Oh,
vote.
aye, sorry, aye.
Sean,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Carla,
Aye.
Aaron,
Aye.
Chuck, aye. Okay, John, did you want to give some
Yes,
context?
there were some questions that came up about this policy, so I consulted with Attorney Joyce to answer those questions. The first one, the Title IX sexual harassment only can apply inside the United States. So a field trip outside the United States, you would address it under the civil rights procedure that we that I don't know if it was included in this packet. No, it was in the previous packet. In terms of the question about the superintendent, if the superintendent is accused, there is a clause on the Title IX procedure that says any formal complaint against an employee who holds a supervisory position shall be investigated by a person who is not subject to that supervisor's authority. So if there was some complaint against the superintendent of schools, it would be the school committee chair who would receive the complaint. And then the school committee chair would likely engage a third party to conduct an investigation. My guess is that would be legal counsel. And then the last piece, and I have put the updated policy in here, AC. So sex and gender, according to Attorney Joyce, are interchangeable. But he did update it to include sex instead of gender. So that's reflected in the updated policy.
Okay, any questions? Tom, did you?
Sure. First of all, again, thank you for following through and looking at all these. It looks like we have gone back and done discrimination as a different set of people versus harassment, just by a little bit. I think that's on purpose as well. So that is now what Attorney Joyce is saying. These are the categories for discrimination. These are the categories for harassment. And if you're discriminated against for pregnancy or pregnancy status, it doesn't count, for lack of a better way to say it, right? But you can be harassed for pregnancy or pregnancy status, and it would count to this policy. I just want to make sure we're on the same page on that front.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Okay, I guess ready for the vote. Sean,
Aye.
Tom,
Aye.
John. You're on mute.
I think that was an aye.
Carla,
Aye.
Aaron,
Aye.
Chuck, aye. Thank you, everybody.
Can I just add one additional piece, Chuck, that I also included in the memo?
Yeah, the political.
So, the political ideology question. So I consulted with Colby on this one, where this would be more of a labor issue. And she and I both went through the policies and felt that JI, student rights and responsibilities, would be an appropriate place. So what I'd like to do is either the next meeting or a future meeting coming up to give you a draft of JI, which would include some language around that.
Okay. Carla?
I thank you, John, for doing that. I feel that as a committee, we need to recognize that we have issues. We have issues going on where we need to ensure that our students are able to form their own opinions, political opinions in the classroom, and not be reprimanded for it. And they need to be comfortable to be able to do that, obviously in a respectful manner. And in these times, it's even more important. I personally would like the committee and the administration to encourage or discourage political talk. Leave it outside the school. If you're coming in and it's part of your curriculum, if it's part of your history class, then it's a topic that should be discussed. But if it's not part of your BC Calc class, then let's just teach BC Calc, because there's enough distractions going on. These kids have enough stuff going on. Let's just create an opportunity for them to learn and not have to deal with what political atmosphere the adults in their lives are creating. So I feel really strongly about that, and I just feel like we as a community need to do that in the schools for our kids. So, and so I am looking forward to changes being made to the students' rights and responsibilities, but I think that is one-sided. I think we do need to look into this, teachers talking about controversial issues and making sure that this gets into, you know, the bullying prevention piece of our procedures as well. So thank you for doing that.
So thank you for bringing that up, Carl. I'll also show you changes that we would make in the bullying prevention plan.
Okay, thank you.
Sean?
Yeah, I don't reach quite all the same outcomes as you do, Carla, but I generally agree with the sentiment. And when I was thinking about this this particular policy around rights and responsibilities, when I read it, it feels heavier on responsibilities than rights. And if this is going to be the place where protection for, you know, minority political ideologies or whatever the phrasing ends up being, if this is going to be the place where it goes, I wonder if, you know, just as you and Attorney Brunt are drafting this, I wonder if we could look at, is there a way to sort of change some of the phrasing in here so that it's more positively empowering, I suppose, as opposed to, you know, does that make sense? I mean, it's kind of a tone thing more than just inserting the phrase political ideology.
Yes, we can look at that, Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Okay. I guess we're at consent agenda.
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Anyone have any questions on it? Okay, Sean?
Aye.
Aaron?
Aye.
Carla?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
And Tom?
Aye.
Chuck, aye. Okay, it's now reports. Were there any other staff reports other than?
Yeah, we don't have any other reports. I do want to say one thing that I just realized, because I know we've been getting a lot of community emails lately, is that if you don't get responses from us, it's because Outlook is down. It's not because we're not responding. It's just that we don't have the ability to read the emails right now because Outlook is down.
That goes for all of us because that's where those are going to.
That is true. That is true.
So we haven't even received them.
Correct.
No,
We haven't even received them. It's not that we've received them and we can't read them. We haven't received them.
I don't know if we're getting any, but.
Right.
So is there any committee reports, Sean?
No report.
John?
No report.
Aaron?
No report.
Carla, you? gave a report earlier, kind of.
No other report.
Tom?
Just a quick one that there was a FinCom meeting last night as well. Additional conversations around capital and how to use it and whatnot. Dr. Doherty, Mrs. Dowd, and Mr. Huggins were all there in attendance. I was able to jump in briefly in between meetings, but they continue to move forward with some of those conversations.
Thank you. Okay, I think that's the agenda. Okay, does anyone have a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Well, while my mic's still working.
Tom,
Aye.
Sean,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Aaron,
Aye.
Carla,
Aye.
Chuck, aye. Thank you, everybody, and thanks
Thank you.
to
Everyone.
Thank
everyone that
you.
participated. Good night.